My sister struck my infant at the holiday meal, then declared I was overreacting. All guests simply remained still, but then my commanding officer husband Rose met her gaze firmly and roared, "Get out." She never returned. Can you imagine watching your own sister slap your 6-month-old baby right across the face at Christmas dinner? And then, the silence. The sickening, deafening silence from your entire family, who just stared like it was perfectly normal. My husband, David, a military commander, was the only one who moved. What he did next changed everything. But 3 days later, I uncovered a truth that made me realize this wasn't just about one horrifying moment. This was about 28 years of me being completely invisible within my own family. The Sterling family Christmas dinner had always been Vanessa's show, and that December 23rd was no different. She rolled up 2 hours late in her white Tesla, dragging in ring lights and a whole camera crew she'd hired. Why? To film her authentic family Christmas, for her lifestyle blog, of course. I stood in the kitchen doorway, bouncing our baby, Lucas, gently. He was fussy, tired from his afternoon nap. My mom, Patricia, was frantically rearranging the dining room, our dining room, to fit Vanessa's filming setup. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey, but underneath it all, I could practically taste the familiar tension that always came with a Sterling family gathering. My dad, Robert, was in his usual corner chair, scrolling through his phone, perfecting his art of selective blindness, especially when it came to his daughter's drama. Vanessa had been hyping this dinner for weeks online, calling it her family gratitude special, promising her followers an intimate look at holiday traditions. What she conveniently left out was that David had just returned from a 6-month deployment overseas, or that we'd driven 3 hours just to introduce our son to his grandparents for his very first Christmas. None of that mattered to Vanessa's narrative. Then David emerged from the guest bedroom, looking sharp in his dress uniform. Even off-duty, he carried that quiet authority from years of leading soldiers. He caught my eye across the room, giving me one of those small, reassuring smiles that meant everything will be okay, even when I wasn't sure it would be. The dining room looked like a magazine spread. Vanessa had moved Grandma's antique candlesticks, relocated family photos, even swapped out our napkins, all for better angles. She directed her cameraman like it was a commercial shoot. Mom, Patricia, bustled around Vanessa, adjusting everything to her standards. The turkey, now under heat lamps to look perfect, the side dishes rearranged 3 times, even the flowers replaced with Vanessa's photogenic arrangement. I'd learned long ago not to comment. In the past, pointing out the absurdity only led to lectures about supporting family and understanding big dreams. The message was always clear. I was small-minded, jealous, threatened by Vanessa's vision. David helped me settle Lucas in the high chair we'd brought, a solid, old wooden one that had belonged to David's grandmother. It looked oddly out of place amidst Vanessa's curated aesthetic. Lucas gurgled happily, reaching for his toys, blissfully unaware he was about to become an unwitting part of his aunt's content creation. The meal began with Vanessa's customary gratitude speech, delivered directly to her camera. We all sat in awkward silence. She rambled about family traditions, togetherness, and how blessed she was to share these moments with her followers. 10 minutes and not a single mention of David's deployment, Lucas's first Christmas, or any of the actual people sitting there. When she finally signaled for filming to pause, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Mom immediately served Vanessa's plate, ensuring it was perfect before anyone else got food. Dad emerged from his phone long enough to carve the turkey, though he kept glancing at the cameras nervously. David and I exchanged glances, trying to navigate eating while keeping Lucas entertained and quiet. The conversation flowed predictably. Vanessa dominated, detailing her latest brand partnerships, collaborations, and all the exciting opportunities falling into her lap. Mom hung on her every word, asking about follower counts as if it were a masterclass. I tried to contribute, sharing updates about our life at Fort Henderson, David's promotion, parenthood. But my stories just vanished. Acknowledged with polite nods, then the conversation inevitably circled back to Vanessa's world. It felt like trying to add ingredients to a recipe that was already completed and plated. David noticed, of course. He always did. He'd ask me follow-up questions, drawing me back in, sharing stories about the base, the military families we'd grown close to, how proud he was of me during his deployment. His efforts were kind, but they only highlighted how little interest my own family showed in my actual life. Lucas was being remarkably well-behaved, content to chew his teething toys and observe. Occasionally, he'd babble or laugh, drawing brief smiles before the adult conversation resumed. He was fascinated by Vanessa's lights, reaching for them with that determined focus only babies have. Midway through the main course, Vanessa decided she needed candid family interaction footage. She positioned her cameraman. Nothing natural about performing dinner conversation for thousands. She told us to eat and talk normally while she provided commentary about the beautiful chaos of family gatherings. This is where things started to go wrong, so subtly that it was hard to pinpoint the exact shift. Vanessa was always particular about control, but the filming pressure combined with her usual need to be the center of attention seemed to escalate her stress. She kept calling for resets, when conversations didn't flow, when an expression wasn't right, when background noise interfered. Lucas, meanwhile, was getting tired. His cheerful babbling turned into a soft whimpering, that precursor to a meltdown every parent dreads. David and I tried to calm him with quiet songs, gentle bounces, but the unfamiliar environment, disrupted nap, and unusual activity were clearly overwhelming him. I suggested taking him to the guest room for a few minutes. Vanessa immediately objected. She was filming the heart of the segment. People leaving would ruin the content. Babies were adaptable, she assured me. A little fussing was normal, and we shouldn't interrupt her special family time. Mom agreed, adding I was overly cautious. Dad just nodded, not looking up. David's jaw tightened. I knew that look. He was choosing his words carefully. He suggested a short break from filming. But Vanessa pivoted. Instead of minimizing Lucas's fussing, she'd incorporate it. She started speaking to her camera about the beautiful messiness of real family life. Lucas's whimpering escalated into actual crying. The kind of tired, overwhelmed sobbing that breaks a parent's heart. I reached for him instinctively, but Vanessa held up her hand to stop me. She was still filming. Still trying to capture this authentic moment of holiday chaos. She seemed to think Lucas's distress added authenticity to her content. David's face was completely still. The expression he wore when dealing with high-stakes situations in his command. He watched Vanessa with the careful attention he usually reserved for assessing threats. I could see him calculating, weighing options, trying to find a diplomatic solution to protect his son without causing a larger conflict. I tried again to reach Lucas. Again, Vanessa stopped me. More direct this time. I was being dramatic, she said. A little crying never hurt anyone. She reminded me she had experience with children babysitting in high school, and sometimes parents needed to relax their overprotective instincts. Lucas's crying intensified. A desperate wailing that filled the dining room, competing with Vanessa's continued commentary about embracing the chaos. She seemed oblivious. Everyone else at the table had stopped eating, stopped pretending, stopped participating in her performance. That's when it happened. Vanessa, clearly frustrated that Lucas's crying was drowning out her audio, leaned across the table. Her hand moved so quickly, I wasn't even sure what I'd seen. Then came the sharp crack of her palm against Lucas's cheek. It echoed through the suddenly silent room. Lucas's crying stopped instantly, replaced by a shocked, agonizing silence. Then came a wail unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. A sound of pure bewilderment and pain that pierced straight through my soul. His tiny cheek was already turning red where she'd struck him. Nobody moved. Mom was frozen, fork halfway to her mouth. Dad's eyes were wide with shock, but he stayed in his chair. The cameraman kept filming, unsure. Vanessa herself seemed momentarily stunned by what she'd done, her hand still extended. But David moved. He rose from his chair with the controlled precision of someone trained for high-pressure situations. No rush, no sudden explosion. just the deliberate unfolding of a man who had made a decision. His 6 feet 3 inches frame seemed to fill the room, his uniform making him even more imposing. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried an authority that made people listen. "Turn off the camera." It wasn't a request. The cameraman immediately complied. The red recording light disappeared, deepening the silence. David walked to Lucas. He lifted our son with the gentle competence of a father who'd comforted him through countless nights, holding him close, murmuring soft reassurances. Lucas's cries began to subside, reduced to hiccuping sobs against David's shoulder. "Vanessa," David said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "You just struck my infant son." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I need you to explain to me why you thought that was acceptable." Vanessa's face went from pale shock to defensive red. "He was being disruptive," she said, her voice high. "I was trying to teach him that crying isn't appropriate at the dinner table. Sometimes children need clear boundaries." "He's 6 months old," David replied, in that eerily calm tone. "He doesn't understand boundaries. He understands that someone hurt him." He adjusted Lucas gently, checking his cheek, where a faint red mark was still visible. "And you struck him hard enough to leave a mark." The room remained frozen. Mom finally found her voice a whisper. "Vanessa, honey, you shouldn't have." "Don't," David interrupted, not raising his voice, but somehow commanding immediate attention. "Don't minimize this. Don't excuse it. And don't you dare suggest that what just happened was acceptable in any way." He turned back to Vanessa, who was now looking around, searching for support that wasn't coming. "You are going to pack up your equipment and leave now. And you are not going to come near my family again until you can explain to me how you plan to ensure this never happens again." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. "You can't just. I mean, this is my family too. You can't ban me from family gatherings." Her voice gained strength, defensive anger replacing shock. "You're being completely unreasonable. It was barely a tap. You're acting like I committed some terrible crime." David's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. Anyone who'd served under his command would recognize the warning. Barely a tap that left a mark on my infant son's face," he said. "A tap administered because he was crying, which is literally the only way babies have to communicate distress." He looked around the table, his gaze settling on each family member. "And not one of you moved to stop her. Not one of you said a word. You all sat here and watched someone strike a baby, and you're now trying to minimize it because she's family." The truth of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Mom's face crumpled with shame. Dad finally looked up, though he couldn't meet David's eyes. Vanessa's defensive anger wavered, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. But it was too late. David had made his decision. "Natalie," he said, turning to me, his expression gentle. "Lucas's things. We're leaving." He paused, looking back at the family that had just revealed its true nature. "And we won't be coming back." I stood on shaking legs, my whole body still processing. Lucas was calm now in David's arms, but I could see the confusion in his wide eyes, the way he kept touching his cheek. The sight of it sent a wave of protective fury through me I'd never felt before. As I gathered our things, I heard voices from the dining room. Vanessa's, raised in justification, Mom's, pleading, David's, still calm, but immovable. By the time I returned with our bag, the conversation had ended. David stood by the front door, Lucas nestled on his shoulder, our diaper bag already slung over his own. His face was set in the expression I'd learned meant the discussion was over. Vanessa stood near the dining room doorway, blotchy with tears and anger, Mom hovering nearby, wringing her hands. "This is insane," Vanessa called out as we headed for the door. "You're destroying our family over nothing." "Absolutely nothing. He's fine. Look at him, he's not even crying anymore." David stopped at the threshold and turned back one final time. "The fact that you think striking a baby is nothing tells me everything I need to know about your judgment," he said. "And the fact that the rest of this family is willing to excuse it tells me everything I need to know about their priorities." He opened the door and gestured for me to go ahead. As we walked to our car, I could hear Mom calling, begging us to come back, to talk it through, to not let one incident ruin the holiday. But David's stride never faltered, and neither did mine. We drove home in silence. Lucas slept peacefully in his car seat, his cheek now bearing only the faintest pink mark. David's hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw still set in that grim line. It wasn't until we were safely home, Lucas fed and settled, that the full weight hit me. I sat on our couch, still in the dress I'd chosen for Christmas dinner, and started to cry. Not just for tonight, but for all the years of feeling invisible, dismissed, overlooked by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. David sat beside me, pulling me close without a word. He understood that sometimes there were no words. Comfort was just about being present, steady, while someone processed their pain. "I'm proud of you," I finally whispered against his shoulder. For what? For standing up. For protecting him. For not letting them minimize what happened. I pulled back to look at him. I don't think anyone has ever defended me like that before. His expression softened, reserved just for our quiet moments. "That's what real family does," he said. "They protect each other. They don't excuse abuse. And they don't ask you to tolerate the intolerable for the sake of peace." Later that night, replaying everything, I realized David was right about more than just that moment. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of experiences with people who demanded my silence, my accommodation, my willingness to accept less than I deserved. But this time was different. This time, someone had stood up. Someone had said no. Someone had made it clear that this behavior was unacceptable and there would be consequences. As I drifted off to sleep, with my baby safe in the next room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years concerning my family. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the solid peace that comes from knowing your boundaries are respected and your worth is recognized. What I didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. The events of that Christmas dinner would set in motion a series of discoveries that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my own strength. But for that night, it was enough to know that someone had finally stood up for what was right. The war began 3 days later. A phone call, while David fed Lucas his morning bottle, and I stared at the untouched Christmas presents. Mom's voice, Patricia, sounded strained, rehearsed. "Natalie, honey, I know you're upset, but we need to talk. Vanessa feels terrible. She didn't sleep at all. She wants to apologize properly, but she can't if you won't answer her call." I held the phone away, looking at David, who watched me with concern. Lucas gurgled happily, oblivious. The red mark on his cheek was barely visible, but I could still see it. "Mom," I finally said. "She hit my baby. She struck a 6-month-old child because he was crying. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. She barely touched him, Natalie. You're making this into something much bigger than it was. People make mistakes when they're stressed. You know how important her work is, and the filming was disrupted." I interrupted, heat rising in my chest. "Mom." She slapped Lucas across the face because he was interfering with her social media content. "Do you hear how that sounds?" Patricia's sigh crackled through the phone. "You've always been dramatic about these things, sweetheart. Ever since you were little, you've blown situations out of proportion. Vanessa was just trying to teach him some boundaries. Sometimes children need firm guidance. You've always been dramatic." The phrase hit me like cold water. How many times had I heard those words? How many times had my legitimate concerns been dismissed with that exact explanation? I gripped the phone tighter. "He's 6 months old, Mom. He doesn't understand boundaries. He understands that someone hurt him for expressing a basic need." "Now you sound like David," Patricia said, and there was something in her tone that made me pause. "He's always been very rigid. Military men often are. But families work differently than the army, Natalie. Families require flexibility and forgiveness." David looked up from Lucas's bottle, one eyebrow raised. He'd heard. I could see him making mental notes, gathering intelligence. "What does David have to do with this?" I asked. "Well, he's the one who made the big scene. Vanessa said he was completely unreasonable, ordering people around like he was commanding troops. She said he threatened to ban her from the family." Patricia's voice trailed off, as if David's behavior was unspeakably inappropriate. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Mom." David protected our son from someone who had just hit him. That's what fathers do. That's what anyone should do when they see a child being hurt. But Vanessa is family, honey. Family means giving people second chances. It means not letting one mistake destroy relationships built over decades. David doesn't understand that because he didn't grow up with us. He doesn't know how we handle things. The conversation continued for 10 more minutes, each exchange making me feel more disoriented. Patricia painted a picture that bore little resemblance to what I'd witnessed. In her version, Vanessa had barely made contact. Everyone overreacted. David had turned a minor disagreement into a major crisis through his inflexibility and outsider perspective. When I finally hung up, David watched me with the expression he wore after a difficult mission debrief. "Let me guess," he said. "It's our fault." "According to my mother, yes." "Vanessa feels terrible, but I'm being dramatic and you're being controlling because you don't understand how families work." David set down Lucas's empty bottle, lifting him to his shoulder for a burp. "And how do families work, according to her?" "Apparently, they work by excusing abuse and expecting the victims to be understanding about it." I slumped against the counter, exhausted despite having been awake for less than 2 hours. "She actually said you don't understand family dynamics because you didn't grow up with them." "She's right about that," David said quietly. "I didn't grow up with them. I grew up in a family where adults protected children instead of making excuses for people who hurt them." The difference hit me with unexpected force. David's family had challenges, but I'd never heard his parents dismiss abuse or ask victims to be understanding. His grandmother, Eleanor, had been fiercely protective, never tolerating harm to any grandchild. The phone rang again an hour later. This time, it was Dad, Robert, speaking in the careful tone he used when mediating conflicts. He'd clearly been coached by Mom, because his words had a rehearsed quality. "Natalie, I think we all need to step back and look at this objectively. Your mother told me about her conversation, and it sounds like there might be some miscommunication." "Dad, there's no miscommunication. Vanessa hit Lucas. Multiple people saw it. There's nothing unclear." "Well, that's just it." Vanessa said she was just trying to get his attention, maybe redirect his fussing. She said she might have been a little firmer than necessary, but she never intended to hurt him. And honestly, looking at him now, he seems fine. Children are resilient. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process my own father explaining what had happened to my child. "Dad, intent doesn't matter when we're talking about hitting a baby. The impact matters. The fact that she thought striking him was an appropriate response to crying matters. But that's the thing, sweetheart. She's not experienced with babies. She was just trying to help in the moment. Sometimes people make poor choices when they're trying to handle unfamiliar situations." The conversation followed the same pattern. Every concern met with an explanation for why it wasn't a problem. Every time I centered Lucas's well-being, the discussion redirected to Vanessa's feelings, her inexperience, her stress, her good intentions. By the time Dad hung up, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I misunderstood? Was I overreacting? My parents, people I'd trusted my entire life, were telling me my perceptions were wrong, my protective instincts misguided, my husband's response disproportionate. David found me at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. He later said I looked like I was in shell shock. He'd settled Lucas for his nap and immediately recognized something had shifted. "What did your dad say?" he asked, sitting across from me. "He said that Vanessa didn't mean to hurt Lucas, that she was just trying to help, that maybe she was a little firmer than necessary, but children are resilient." I repeated the words flatly, hoping saying them might make sense. David was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he asked, "What do you think happened yesterday?" The question surprised me, not because I didn't know the answer, but because no one else had asked me what I thought. Everyone had been telling me what to think. "I think my sister hit my baby because he was crying and it was interfering with her filming," I said, feeling some clarity return as I spoke my truth out loud. "I think it was hard enough to leave a mark and shock him into silence. I think it was completely inappropriate and potentially harmful." I paused. And I think my parents are more interested in protecting Vanessa from consequences than they are in protecting Lucas from being hurt again. That's what I think. That's what I think too, David said. So the question is, do you trust your own perceptions, or do you trust people who are telling you that what you saw didn't really happen? It was a fair question, but a devastating one. The people asking me to doubt myself were my parents. The person supporting my perceptions was my husband, someone I'd known for 5 years, but who had consistently demonstrated better judgment and clearer moral boundaries than my family of origin. The third call came that afternoon, and this time it was Vanessa herself. Her voice was thick with tears, trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. This was the sister I remembered from childhood, vulnerable, seeking connection, not the polished influencer. Natty, I feel so horrible. I haven't been able to eat or sleep. I keep replaying it, wondering how I could have handled things differently. For a moment, a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be the conversation. I'm glad you called, Vanessa. Lucas is okay, but I was really shocked. I need to understand why you thought hitting him was an appropriate response. That's just it, she said, her voice gaining strength. I don't think I really hit him. I think I just touched his cheek to get his attention. And maybe because everyone was so tense about the filming, it seemed like more than it was. You know how these things can get blown out of proportion when emotions are running high. The hope evaporated. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to continue the family narrative that what I'd witnessed hadn't really happened. Vanessa, there was a sound when your hand made contact. There was a mark on his cheek. He went from crying to completely silent in shock before he started wailing. That's not a gentle touch. But that's what I'm trying to tell you. I think everyone's perception was distorted by the stress, the cameras, the filming, David's reaction. It created this atmosphere where a normal interaction got interpreted as something much more serious. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Are you saying I imagined the mark on my baby's face? I'm saying that maybe what looked like a mark was just the natural redness from crying. Maybe what sounded like a slap was just the sound of contact that seemed louder because the room was so quiet. Maybe what felt like a big deal in the moment isn't actually as serious as it seemed. The conversation continued for 20 more minutes. Vanessa crafted an alternative narrative where her actions were reasonable and everyone else's reactions excessive. She'd convinced herself she was the victim of misunderstanding, maybe even a conspiracy to make her look bad. When I finally ended the call, I felt like I'd been wrestling with smoke. Every time I tried to pin down what had happened, she redirected to interpretations, perceptions, alternative explanations, making my own memories feel unreliable. David found me in Lucas's nursery, watching him sleep. Lying on his back, one tiny fist curled near his face, completely peaceful and trusting. The sight of him, so small and defenseless, crystallized something inside me that had been building all day. She's gaslighting me, I said, without turning around. All of them are. They're trying to make me believe that what I saw didn't really happen. Yes, David said quietly. They are. Why would they do that? Why would my own family try to make me doubt my own perceptions about something this serious? David joined me at the crib. Because acknowledging what really happened would require them to take action they're not willing to take. It would mean holding Vanessa accountable, which might disrupt their family dynamic. It would mean admitting they failed to protect Lucas, which would force them to examine their own behavior. So instead, they make you the problem. The fourth call came that evening. Patricia again, but her tone had shifted from pleading to frustrated. The careful diplomacy replaced by something sharper. Natalie, I'm concerned about how you're handling this. You're being very rigid and unforgiving, which isn't like you. I'm wondering if maybe the stress of new motherhood is affecting your judgment. I felt David tense beside me on the couch. Suggesting my judgment was compromised by postpartum issues was a particularly low blow. Mom, my judgment is fine. My priorities are clear. Protecting my child from people who think it's acceptable to hit him isn't negotiable. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. You're characterizing this as hitting when it was clearly something much less serious. You're creating conflict where none needs to exist. You're making choices that are going to damage family relationships permanently over something that could be resolved with basic communication and forgiveness. What would resolution look like to you? I asked, genuinely curious. Vanessa apologizes for the misunderstanding. You accept she didn't mean any harm. David acknowledges his reaction was excessive. And we all move forward with better communication and more patience for each other's differences. I let that sink in. In Patricia's vision, everyone bore equal responsibility. Vanessa would offer a non-apology for a misunderstanding. I would accept blame for misinterpreting. David would admit to overreacting. And Lucas, the actual victim, would be completely absent from the conversation. What about Lucas? I asked. What does resolution look like for him? What do you mean? I mean, what protections would be put in place? What boundaries to keep him safe? What accountability measures to ensure Vanessa understands why hitting a baby is never acceptable? Patricia was quiet. Then, tartly, Natalie, you're overthinking this. He's fine. He's not going to remember any of this. You're creating trauma where none exists. And there it was. The heart of our fundamental disagreement. In my family's worldview, trauma only existed if the victim remembered it. A baby couldn't form lasting memories, so he couldn't be truly harmed. Adult comfort and family harmony took precedence over protecting children from experiences they might not even remember. After I hung up, David and I sat in silence. The movie paused. We both processed what was becoming clear. This wasn't going to blow over. My family wasn't going to understand. And we were going to have to make decisions about how to move forward with people who fundamentally disagreed with our basic values about protecting children. I feel like I'm going crazy, I admitted. 3 different people have told me that what I saw didn't really happen. People I've trusted my entire life are asking me to doubt my own perceptions about something this basic. That's the point, David said. They need you to doubt yourself because if you trust what you saw, you'll make choices they don't want you to make. If you believe Lucas was actually hurt, you'll protect him from people who might hurt him again. They can't have that. But why? Why is protecting Vanessa from consequences more important than protecting Lucas from being hurt? David was quiet for a long time. I think your family has spent a long time organizing itself around managing Vanessa's needs and emotions. She's the center of attention, the source of drama, the person everyone has to accommodate. Protecting that system is more important than protecting individual members who threaten it. The observation hit me with uncomfortable accuracy. Growing up, family decisions often revolved around Vanessa's mood, her plans, her comfort. Gatherings were scheduled around her. Conversations were moderated to avoid upsetting her. Even my own achievements were downplayed if they threatened to overshadow her. I'd accepted this as normal. Healthy even. Families supported their sensitive members, accommodated those who needed extra attention, prioritized harmony. It had never occurred to me that this system could become so entrenched it would prioritize Vanessa's comfort over a baby's safety. The final call of the day came close to midnight. Vanessa's name on the caller ID. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. Curiosity, maybe. Natalie, I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about how to fix this mess. Her voice was softer, less defensive, more sad. I miss you. I miss being close to you like we were when we were kids. A pang of nostalgia. There had been years when we were genuinely close. When her creativity felt inspiring, not overwhelming. Her attention, a gift, not a performance. I miss that too, I said honestly. But I need you to understand why yesterday was so serious. Lucas is my baby, and seeing someone hurt him triggered every protective instinct I have. I get that. I really do. And I would never intentionally hurt him. You have to know that about me. Maybe I was too focused on the filming. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly, but I would never deliberately harm a child. It felt like progress. An acknowledgement. For the first time all day, I felt like we might find common ground. Thank you for saying that. I know you wouldn't hurt him on purpose, but impact matters as much as intent. And the impact was that he got hurt. What I need is some assurance that you understand why it happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Of course. I think what I need to do is be more mindful when I'm around children, especially when I'm stressed or working. Maybe I should ask for help instead of trying to handle situations on my own. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it felt like movement. We talked a few more minutes about boundaries and communication, about balancing family with work, about adjustments as Lucas grew. When we hung up, I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe this could be worked out. Maybe clear boundaries and trust could be rebuilt. But the next morning brought a text message that shattered any hope of reconciliation. It was from Chloe Martinez, our neighbor at Fort Henderson, now a close friend. Saw Vanessa's Instagram story. Are you okay? I opened Instagram with shaking hands. Vanessa's account. The story, family drama, and moving forward. It was a carefully crafted narrative about the challenges of blending families with different parenting styles. She talked about holiday stress, the difficulties of documenting family moments, and the importance of forgiveness and grace when misunderstandings occur. In her version, a minor disagreement about appropriate behavior escalated due to miscommunication and different expectations. She painted herself as someone trying to help a fussy baby, misunderstood by overprotective parents, unfamiliar with extended family dynamics. She never mentioned hitting Lucas, never acknowledged harm. She framed the whole conflict as a learning experience about family communication. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Her followers praised her maturity, her grace, her commitment to family, despite difficult circumstances. Several shared their own stories about in-law conflicts, offering advice on setting boundaries and managing different parenting philosophies. I screenshotted the entire story before it disappeared, then stared at my phone in disbelief. Less than 12 hours after what felt like a breakthrough conversation about accountability, Vanessa had publicly reframed the entire incident as a misunderstanding caused by my overreaction and David's inflexibility. She had taken our private conversation about her poor judgment and stress and twisted it into a public narrative about other people's unreasonable expectations. She had positioned herself as the victim of family drama, not the adult who had struck a baby. And she did it all while maintaining plausible deniability, never technically lying, but also never telling the truth. When David came home from his morning run and found me crying, I showed him the phone without saying anything. He read it twice, his expression growing grimmer. "She played you," he said. The late-night call, the apparent acknowledgement, the promise to be more mindful, all of it was designed to get information she could use to craft this narrative. I felt foolish for having believed that conversation represented genuine remorse. But more than that, I felt betrayed. By someone I'd loved and trusted since childhood, someone who had used my willingness to give her another chance as an opportunity to manipulate the situation further. The phone started ringing again, but this time I didn't answer. It was Mom, probably calling to discuss Vanessa's Instagram story and encourage me to see it as positive. But I was done listening to explanations about why my perceptions were wrong and my boundaries unreasonable. Instead, I did something I'd never done in a family conflict. I started documenting everything. I wrote down exactly what happened at dinner, including direct quotes. I saved screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram story and the comments. I made notes about each phone conversation, including the specific language my family members used to minimize the incident and question my judgment. For the first time in my life, I was treating my family like potential adversaries rather than trusted allies. As I organized the evidence of their gaslighting and manipulation, I began to understand that this pattern had been happening for much longer than just the past few days. This was how they had always handled conflicts that threatened their preferred narrative. This was how they had always managed situations where Vanessa's behavior created problems for other people. This was how they had trained me over decades to doubt my own perceptions and prioritize family harmony over my own well-being. But this time was different. This time the victim wasn't just me. It was my infant son. Someone who couldn't advocate for himself or choose to walk away. This time I had a partner who supported my perceptions and validated my concerns. And this time I was going to fight back. The documentation process revealed patterns I hadn't consciously recognized before. Scrolling through old texts and social media, a clear picture emerged of how my family had managed conflicts for years. Every time Vanessa created a problem, the same cycle played out: initial shock, followed by explanations and excuses, then pressure on everyone else to accommodate her version. I found a text thread from 2 years earlier, when Vanessa showed up 4 hours late to Grandma Eleanor's memorial service because she was filming a makeup collaboration. Instead of addressing her disrespect, the family spent the reception discussing how grief affects people differently. My hurt feelings were reframed as selfishness during a difficult time. Another thread from last spring showed a similar pattern when Vanessa borrowed Mom's car and returned it with significant damage. The insurance claim was thousands, but the family conversation focused on accidents happen and material possessions aren't worth damaging relationships. Mom paid the deductible herself. The more I looked, the clearer it became that I had been trained to accept this dynamic as normal family behavior. I'd learned to minimize my own needs, question my own perceptions, and prioritize everyone else's comfort. The Christmas dinner incident wasn't an anomaly. It was the most extreme example of a pattern that had shaped my life for decades. David found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed screenshots and handwritten notes, a case file. He poured coffee and sat across from me, studying the organized evidence. "This looks like intelligence gathering," he observed. "That's exactly what it is," I said. "I'm trying to understand how they do this. How they consistently manage to make me feel like I'm the problem when they're the ones causing harm." I gestured to a timeline I'd created. "Look at this pattern. Every single time, the same thing happened." David examined it. Incident, denial, reframing, pressure to forgive, eventual acceptance of the family narrative. It's sophisticated. They've created a system that protects Vanessa from consequences while training everyone else to doubt their own judgment. But why me specifically? Why am I always the one being asked to be more understanding, more forgiving, more flexible? Because you're the one who challenges. You're the one who notices when things don't add up. You're the one who asks uncomfortable questions. He pointed to incidents on my timeline. In every case, you were the person who initially called out the problematic behavior. They need to neutralize you because you're the threat to their system. The observation hit me hard. I'd always thought of myself as helpful, as someone who wanted to improve family dynamics. But from their perspective, I was a disruptor. My phone buzzed with another text from Mom. "Honey, I saw you read Vanessa's Instagram story. I hope you can see she's really trying to move forward. Maybe we could all get together this weekend to talk through everything calmly." I showed the message to David. He shook his head. "They're trying to reset the narrative again. Get everyone in the same room, apply social pressure, convince you to accept their version for the sake of family peace. But what if I'm wrong?" I whispered, fear creeping in. What if I am being too rigid? What if there really is a way to work through this that doesn't require cutting people out of our lives? David set down his coffee cup and looked at me seriously. "Let me ask you something. If one of my soldiers struck a baby during a family gathering and then spent the next week convincing everyone that it hadn't really happened, while publicly reframing themselves as the victim, what would you think I should do?" The question clarified everything instantly. If this were happening to anyone else, I'd be horrified. I'd tell them to protect their child and set clear boundaries. I'd tell them to document everything and stay away from people who think hitting babies is negotiable. "Right," I answered. "So why is your family different?" I didn't have a good answer. The only reason I considered compromise was because these were people I'd loved my entire life, whose approval I'd sought since childhood, whose rejection felt like losing a fundamental part of my identity. But none of those reasons justified exposing Lucas to people who might hurt him again. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Chloe Martinez. She'd been following the situation. "Natalie, I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how you'll take it. I've been going through Vanessa's social media more carefully, and I found some posts from earlier this year you need to see." She sent me screenshots. One showed a professional photo shoot using baby props, captioned about new beginnings. Another featured her holding what appeared to be a newborn, text about blessings of being an aunt. The problem? Both posts were published weeks before Lucas was born, using stock photos and borrowed babies to create content about an experience she hadn't had yet. She'd been monetizing her relationship with my unborn child, creating sponsored content about our family moments before they even happened. "There's more," Chloe said when I called her back. I found a whole series of posts about family traditions, holiday celebrations, and multi-generational gatherings that all feature photos from Christmas dinner last year, the one you and David missed because of his deployment. She's been creating this narrative about close family relationships that doesn't actually exist. I felt sick. Vanessa had built a brand around family content that was largely fiction. Her followers believed she was documenting authentic moments, but she was crafting staged content designed to generate engagement and sponsorships. The Christmas dinner incident started making more sense. She hadn't just been filming for documentation, she'd been creating content for a business that depended on maintaining a specific image of family harmony. Lucas's crying had threatened not just her filming schedule, but her entire brand identity. He and I were just props. And when he interfered by acting like a normal baby, she prioritized her content over his well-being. The realization was devastating, but also clarifying. This hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment by someone overwhelmed by stress. This had been a calculated decision by someone who viewed our family as raw material for her business and who was willing to harm a child to protect her commercial interest. I spent the evening going through more of Vanessa's content, documenting how extensively she'd monetized our family relationships without our consent. Photos of our wedding, stories about David's deployment, speculation about future children, all used for sponsored posts. Most disturbing were the posts about grandparents and family traditions, portraying mom and dad as deeply involved, loving grandparents, despite their minimal interest in actual relationships with Lucas. The gap between Vanessa's public narrative and our private reality was enormous. The next morning brought a series of texts from various family members, all encouraging me to attend a family meeting Mom had scheduled for the weekend. The messages used remarkably similar language about healing, communication, and moving forward, suggesting they'd been coordinated. But I was done being managed. Instead of responding, I called our family's insurance company to report the incident involving Lucas. I wasn't filing a claim, but I wanted it documented. The representative was professional but clearly disturbed, asking if I needed resources for child protective services. I also called Lucas's pediatrician, Dr. Rebecca Walsh. I trusted her judgment. When I explained what happened, she immediately scheduled an appointment and asked for photos of any marks. The pediatric appointment was both validating and heartbreaking. Dr. Walsh examined Lucas, documented the fading mark, and asked detailed questions. Cause for serious concern, regardless of intent or family relationship, she said. Parents need to trust their protective instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. Your job is to keep Lucas safe, not to manage other people's feelings about your safety measures. She also gave me resources about family violence and documenting incidents for potential legal proceedings. I hadn't considered legal action, but having the information felt empowering after days of being told my concerns were overblown. That afternoon, I received a call from Captain Ryan Torres, one of David's closest colleagues. He and his wife Maria had become good friends. Natalie, I hope you don't mind me calling, but Maria and I want you to know we're behind you 100%. What happened to Lucas is unacceptable, and the way your family is handling it is concerning. A wave of relief washed over me. After days of being told I was overreacting, it was powerful to hear validation from someone outside the situation. Thank you, Ryan. I've been starting to doubt my own judgment about everything. Don't. You're a good mother, and you're doing exactly what you should be doing. David is lucky to have a partner who will stand up for their child, even when it's difficult. Ryan also shared that David had been consulting with military legal services about options for protecting our family. The military took family violence seriously, and there were resources for service members dealing with civilian family conflicts that might affect security clearances. The conversation helped me realize David and I weren't alone. We had a community who shared our values about protecting children. Our chosen family was standing behind us, even if our birth family was not. That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I drafted a group text to Patricia, Robert, and Vanessa, clearly stating our boundaries. Calm, but firm. We would not be attending family gatherings until Vanessa acknowledged what happened and demonstrated genuine accountability. The response was immediate and intense. My phone buzzed with calls and messages. Mom called in hysterics, begging me not to destroy the family over a misunderstanding. Dad texted, asking me to reconsider such a drastic response to what he called a minor incident. Vanessa sent a series of messages alternating between anger and hurt, accusing me of being vindictive and manipulative. But the message that stopped me cold came from Aunt Linda. Saw the Instagram situation. This isn't the first time. Call me when you're ready to hear about the others. I stared at the message for several minutes before showing it to David. What others? He asked. I have no idea, but Linda wouldn't say something like that unless she had specific information. I called Linda immediately, my hands shaking. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Natalie, honey, I've been watching this unfold, and I think it's time you knew some things about your family they've been keeping from you. What kind of things? Linda was quiet. There have been other incidents. Times when Vanessa hurt people. Usually children. And the family covered it up or explained it away. I never said anything because it wasn't my place. But watching them do it to your baby, I can't stay quiet anymore. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and changed everything I thought I knew about my family history. Linda told me about incidents dating back to Vanessa's teenage years, being rough with younger cousins, harsh with children she was babysitting, inappropriate with kids at gatherings. In every case, the family intervened to minimize the situation and protect Vanessa. Parents were told their children were dramatic or oversensitive. Witnesses were asked to keep quiet for the sake of family harmony. Vanessa was coached on what to say, but never held accountable. I've watched your parents train that girl to believe she can hurt people without consequences, Linda said. And I've watched them train everyone else to accept it. When I saw what happened at Christmas dinner and then saw how they were handling it, I knew it was time to speak up. Linda also revealed something that explained a lot. Vanessa had been born with developmental delays requiring extensive early intervention. Mom and Dad had spent years advocating for her, protecting her. The problem was, they'd never transitioned from protecting a child with special needs to holding an adult accountable for harmful behavior. They continued making excuses and accommodations long past the point where Vanessa was capable of understanding and controlling her actions. She knows exactly what she's doing, Linda said. She's learned that if she can make people feel sorry for her, or convince them she's misunderstood, she can get away with almost anything. And your parents enable it because they've spent so many years seeing her as vulnerable, they can't recognize when she's being manipulative. By the time I hung up, I felt like I'd been given a completely different map of my family. Decades of confusing interactions suddenly made sense. The pattern of protecting Vanessa at everyone else's expense wasn't new. It was a system refined over years. More importantly, Linda's information made it clear that Lucas wasn't Vanessa's first victim, and he wouldn't be her last if the family kept enabling her. Christmas dinner wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the latest example of a long-standing pattern hidden from me because I'd been too young, too distant, or too willing to accept family explanations. The next morning, I woke with absolute clarity. I wasn't just protecting Lucas from one bad incident. I was breaking a generational cycle of abuse and enablement that had been damaging children in my family for years. I called Linda back and asked if she would document what she'd told me, provide written statements. She agreed immediately, saying she'd carried the guilt of staying silent for too long. I reached out to other family members who might have information. Some were reluctant, but others were relieved to finally talk about things they'd witnessed. By the end of the week, I had a comprehensive picture of how my family protected Vanessa while putting other children at risk. Written statements from multiple witnesses, documentation of previous incidents, clear evidence. That Christmas dinner was part of a much larger pattern. David and I spent that weekend planning. We weren't interested in revenge or public humiliation. We were committed to protecting Lucas and preventing future incidents. We decided to share our documentation with family members who had children so they could make informed decisions. We would maintain our boundaries regardless of how the family responded. Linda's information made it clear this wasn't a problem to be solved with better communication. This required fundamental changes in accountability that my family had shown no willingness to make. Most importantly, we decided to build our own family traditions and support systems that didn't depend on people who prioritized maintaining dysfunction over protecting children. Lucas deserved to grow up where his safety was never negotiable, where adults took responsibility, and his well-being wasn't sacrificed for someone else's comfort. As I organized the evidence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of complete information and the power to act on it. I was no longer the confused family member being told my perceptions were wrong. I understood exactly what was happening and why, and I had the resources to respond appropriately. The war that had begun with a slapped baby was about to become a battle for the truth. And for the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt confident about which side would win. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter from Vanessa's attorney demanding I cease what they called a defamation campaign against their client. The letter claimed I was spreading false information and damaging Vanessa's professional reputation through malicious statements to family members and online activity. I stared at the legal letterhead in disbelief. I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't spoken to anyone outside the immediate family except for close friends. The only campaign I'd conducted was documenting actual events and sharing factual information with relatives who had young children. David read the letter over my shoulder, his expression growing darker. "They're trying to intimidate you into silence," he said. "This is what people do when they know they're guilty, but can't afford to have the truth come out." The letter demanded I sign a statement acknowledging no assault occurred, that any claims about Vanessa striking Lucas were fabricated, and that I would refrain from making any future statements damaging her business interests. In exchange, they wouldn't pursue legal action. Business interests, I repeated, the full weight of it hitting me. She's not worried about family harmony. She's worried about her brand and her income stream. That afternoon, I called the law office of Janet Morrison, an attorney Linda had recommended. Janet specialized in family law and child protection. She agreed to see me immediately. Her initial assessment was both reassuring and concerning. "The letter is largely bluster," she told me after reviewing my documentation. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims, and you have substantial evidence. But the fact that they're escalating to legal threats suggests they're feeling genuine pressure." Janet explained Vanessa's business model depended on maintaining a specific public image. If sponsors and followers learned about her history with children, or if her family relationships were revealed to be fictional, the financial impact could be devastating. The legal threats weren't about protecting her reputation. They were about protecting her income. "I want you to prepare for them to escalate further," Janet warned. "People with a lot to lose can become dangerous when they feel cornered. Document everything. Stay safe. And don't engage directly with any of them until we develop a comprehensive strategy." Our strategy session with Janet revealed options I hadn't considered. We could file for a restraining order. We could pursue our own legal action for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We could report the incident to Child Protective Services to create an official record. Most importantly, Janet helped me understand I wasn't required to keep family secrets that put children at risk. The evidence I'd gathered about previous incidents wasn't gossip. It was information other parents had a right to know. That evening, I made copies of everything we'd assembled and prepared packages for family members with young children. Each included documentation of the Christmas dinner, witness statements about previous events, and information about Vanessa's pattern of avoiding accountability. I wasn't asking anyone to choose sides. I was simply providing information so they could make informed decisions. The response was swift and explosive. My phone buzzed constantly. Some were supportive, thanking me for information that explained incidents they'd witnessed but been told to forget. Others were furious, accusing me of trying to destroy the family. Mom called in hysterics, demanding I explain why I was attacking Vanessa with lies and propaganda. She'd seen some of the documentation and was devastated by what Linda and others had shared. "Those things happened years ago," she sobbed. "Vanessa was just a child herself. She didn't understand what she was doing. Why are you dragging up ancient history to hurt her now?" "Because it's not ancient history, Mom. It's a pattern that's continuing today. And other parents deserve to know about that pattern when they're making decisions about their children's safety. But she's changed. She's grown up. She would never intentionally hurt a child now. She hit Lucas 6 days ago, Mom. Whatever changes you think she's made clearly haven't addressed the fundamental problem. The conversation deteriorated, with Mom alternating between begging me to retract and threatening to cut me out of the family. It was the same emotional manipulation I'd experienced my entire life, but this time, I recognized it and refused to be swayed. Dad's response was different, but equally revealing. He called late that night, speaking in the controlled tone he used to manage crises. His approach was more strategic than Mom's emotional appeals, focusing on reputation and consequences. Natalie, I understand you're upset, but this approach is going to hurt everyone. If this becomes public, it could affect David's military career. Have you thought about the security clearance implications of being involved in a family scandal? It was a low blow, trying to use David's professional obligations to pressure me. But it also revealed how little Dad understood military values. The military didn't penalize service members for protecting children or reporting abuse. Quite the opposite. Dad, David's career is built on integrity and protecting people who can't protect themselves. His command would be more concerned if he failed to protect his own child from someone with a history of violence. But Vanessa doesn't have a history of violence. These are isolated incidents that happened years apart, mostly when she was young. You're creating a narrative that makes her sound like a dangerous predator when she's just someone who's made some mistakes. Mistakes are accidents, Dad. Patterns are choices. And a pattern of hurting children, followed by a pattern of avoiding consequences, isn't something I'm going to help hide anymore. The most devastating call came from my cousin Sarah, a mother of 2 young children, who'd received one of my information packages. Natalie, I need you to know that I believe everything you've documented. I was there for some of those incidents, and I've been carrying guilt about staying quiet for years. Her voice was shaky but determined. When I saw what happened to Lucas and then saw how everyone was handling it, I realized I couldn't protect my own kids if I couldn't even acknowledge what I'd witnessed. Sarah shared details about an incident from her teenage years not in Linda's account. During a family reunion, Vanessa had pushed Sarah's younger brother down a flight of stairs after he'd accidentally knocked over something she was filming. He'd suffered a concussion, but the family explained it as an accident and forbade Sarah from talking. I was 17 and scared of causing family drama, so I went along with the story, she said. But I've regretted it ever since. And when I had my own children, I made sure they were never alone with Vanessa, even though I couldn't explain why. Sarah's testimony was powerful. It provided crucial corroboration. But Sarah also revealed something that changed my understanding of the current situation. Natalie, there's something else. Vanessa isn't just worried about her current business. She's been in talks with a major network about a reality show centered around her family content. The Christmas dinner footage was supposed to be part of her audition reel. The information hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa hadn't just been creating content for existing followers. She'd been filming us for a potential television show without our knowledge or consent. Lucas's first Christmas had been treated as raw material for entertainment production. And when he'd interfered by acting like a normal baby, she'd prioritized the footage over his well-being. The network executives are supposed to review her submission this week, Sarah continued. That's probably why she's escalating the legal threats. If this information becomes public before they make their decision, it could destroy the biggest opportunity she's ever had. I shared this with David when he returned. His reaction was immediate and intense, not anger, but the cold fury of someone who'd realized the full scope of an underestimated threat. She exploited our family for commercial purposes without our consent. And when our infant son interfered with her production, she assaulted him, he said, his voice deadly calm. And now she's threatening legal action to prevent us from protecting other children. David's military training taught him to identify and neutralize threats systematically. He approached this with methodical precision. We're not just dealing with a family conflict anymore, he told me. We're dealing with someone who's willing to harm children for financial gain and use legal intimidation to cover it up. That makes her a legitimate threat that needs to be addressed through appropriate channels. The next morning, David contacted his command to report the situation. The response was immediate and supportive. His commanding officer, Colonel Martinez, made it clear the military expected service members to report child abuse and protect their families. We can't have personnel being blackmailed or intimidated by family members, especially when child safety is involved, Colonel Martinez told us. We'll provide whatever support you need. The military's backing was both practical and psychological. It meant David wouldn't face professional consequences for standing up, and it gave us access to legal resources. More importantly, it validated our decision to prioritize child protection over family harmony. That afternoon, Janet Morrison called with an update. After reviewing our documentation, she drafted a response that turned the tables. Instead of defending against defamation claims, we were putting Vanessa on notice about potential legal action for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and using our family for commercial purposes without consent. The beauty of truth as a defense, Janet explained, is that it forces the other side to prove their claims are false. Given your evidence, that's going to be very difficult. More likely, they'll realize pursuing this legally will only create more public exposure of information they want to keep private. The response letter was a masterpiece of legal strategy. It acknowledged the incident at Christmas dinner, detailed our evidence, noted the pattern of similar incidents documented by witnesses over years. It also informed Vanessa's attorney that we had evidence of commercial exploitation and were considering our own legal options. Most importantly, it made clear we weren't making public accusations. We were sharing factual information with family members who needed it. If Vanessa wanted to make it public through legal proceedings, we were prepared to present our case in court. The response to our letter was immediate silence. No calls from family, no texts, no social media from Vanessa. It was as if the entire Sterling family apparatus had gone dark. But the silence broke 3 days later. I received a call from Jessica Chin, a producer at the network considering Vanessa's reality show. She'd somehow obtained information about recent events. Miss Brooks, I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your sister's family content and the authenticity of the relationships she's been documenting. Before we move forward, we need to understand what actually happened during the filming she submitted as part of her audition. I stuck to facts. I confirmed the dinner was filmed for commercial purposes, that there had been an incident with my infant son, and that the family relationships portrayed didn't accurately reflect our dynamic. I didn't volunteer inflammatory details, but I answered Jessica's questions honestly. Thank you for your honesty, Jessica said. This information is very helpful as we evaluate our programming decisions. Networks have to be extremely careful about liability, especially when children are involved. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. Calls and messages from my family. Word had gotten back to Vanessa that the network was researching her background, and she was in full panic mode. Mom called, crying, begging me to contact the network. Dad sent multiple texts about family loyalty. But the most revealing response came from Vanessa herself, who showed up at our house unannounced that evening. David answered the door. She stood on our porch, mascara streaking her cheeks, hands shaking with rage. "You destroyed everything," she screamed as soon as she saw me. Years of work, hundreds of thousands of followers, business relationships. All gone because you couldn't just let things go. I didn't destroy anything, Vanessa. I protected my child and shared factual information. If that destroyed your business, maybe your business was built on lies. It wasn't lies. It was content creation. It was storytelling. Everyone knows social media isn't completely literal. It's about creating aspirational content people want to engage with. David stepped between us, his posture making it clear she needed to control herself. You used our family as props for fictional content without our consent. And when our baby interfered with your production, you hit him. There's nothing aspirational about that. I barely touched him. And only because he was ruining months of work. Do you have any idea how hard it is to create authentic family content when people won't cooperate with the vision? The admission was stunning. In her fury, Vanessa had revealed she genuinely believed Lucas should have cooperated with her filming and that striking him was justified by the importance of her content. She wasn't apologetic about hurting him. She was angry that he'd failed to perform. "Get off our property," David said quietly. "And don't come back. You can't just cut me out of the family. I'm Lucas's aunt." You have no rights to access a child you assaulted," David replied. "And if you come here again, I'll call the police." Vanessa's mask slipped completely. The polished influencer, the victim narrative, the claims of misunderstanding all fell away to reveal someone who truly believed she was entitled to use our family for her purposes, and that our refusal to cooperate was a betrayal of natural family obligation. She left screaming threats about lawsuits and consequences. But her rage had actually strengthened our position. David had recorded the entire interaction on his phone, capturing her admission about using our family for content and her anger about Lucas not cooperating. Evidence that would be devastating if she tried to pursue legal action. That night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Christmas dinner: complete certainty. Vanessa's visit had stripped away any doubt about her character or her commitment to changing. She wasn't sorry for hurting Lucas. She was angry that hurting Lucas had consequences. The war wasn't really about one incident. It was about the right of children to be protected from adults who would harm them for personal gain, and the obligation of other adults to speak up rather than protect the abuser for the sake of family peace. We'd chosen protection over peace, truth over comfort, and our child's safety over our family's dysfunction. The consequences were painful but liberating. For the first time, I was free from managing other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being and my child's safety. The battle was far from over, but we'd established clear boundaries and assembled the resources to defend them. We'd demonstrated that some things were worth fighting for, even against people we'd once loved. Lucas would grow up in a family that prioritized his safety over social harmony, that valued truth over convenience, and that understood the difference between love and enabling. That was worth any price. 6 months later, Lucas took his first steps in our backyard. David and I cheered from the patio. He wobbled between the garden bed and the fence, his face lit up with the pure joy of discovery. There were no cameras, no staged lighting, no audience beyond the two people who loved him most. It was authentic in a way Vanessa's manufactured content never could be. The legal threats had evaporated after Vanessa's recorded admission. Janet Morrison crafted a settlement requiring privacy about family matters, while ensuring we could share safety information with relatives who had children. Vanessa agreed to seek counseling, though I doubted she would follow through meaningfully. The reality show opportunity disappeared entirely. Jessica Chin later told me they'd received multiple corroborating accounts about Vanessa's history, and the legal liability was too significant. The entertainment industry, despite its reputation, drew hard lines around child safety. Mom and Dad initially maintained their position that I was destroying the family. But as more relatives came forward, their narrative became impossible to sustain. Linda organized a family meeting where several witnesses shared their accounts, creating a comprehensive picture my parents couldn't dismiss. The meeting was devastating for Mom, who seemed genuinely unaware of the extent of Vanessa's patterns. She'd spent years managing individual incidents, missing the larger pattern. Dad, characteristically, absorbed the information silently before retreating into emotional withdrawal. Neither apologized directly, but their approach shifted from defending Vanessa to avoiding the topic. They stopped pressuring me to reconcile and began interacting with Lucas during brief, supervised visits that felt stilted but safe. It wasn't the warm grandparent relationship I'd hoped for, but it was workable within our new boundaries. Vanessa herself essentially disappeared from family dynamics. Her social media shifted away from family content. She'd moved to Los Angeles, though Linda reported her follower engagement had dropped significantly. The most surprising development was the response from extended family members. Several cousins and aunts reached out, thanking me for speaking up. Sarah became a close ally. My cousin Marcus, Mom's nephew, was particularly grateful. He'd been planning to ask Vanessa to babysit his toddler, unaware of her history. "You probably prevented something terrible from happening," he told me. "I can't thank you enough for having the courage to speak up." The military community at Fort Henderson rallied around us, demonstrating the difference between chosen family and biological family. Colonel Martinez ensured David faced no professional consequences. Our friends shared their own experiences with cutting toxic family members. Captain Torres and Maria became particularly close friends, their children playing well with Lucas. We'd begun creating the kind of authentic family traditions Vanessa manufactured. "You know what I love about our gatherings?" Maria observed. "Nobody's performing. Nobody's managing anyone's emotions. We're just enjoying each other's company without agenda or drama." Dr. Walsh continued monitoring Lucas. At his one-year checkup, she commented on his secure attachment and confident exploration. "Children are resilient when they have consistent, protective caregivers," she'd said. "Lucas clearly knows he's safe with you." That meant more than any family reconciliation. We'd prioritized Lucas's well-being, and he was thriving. His trust in us was complete because we'd proven ourselves trustworthy. David was promoted to lieutenant colonel. His superiors noted his integrity in handling a complex family crisis requiring protecting dependents while maintaining professional obligations. The military valued the same principles we'd applied: protecting the vulnerable, clear boundaries, refusing to compromise core values for social convenience. I started volunteering with a family advocacy program on base, helping military spouses navigate difficult situations with civilian family members. Many had experienced similar conflicts between loyalty to birth families and protection of their children. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful. I learned to recognize the signs of gaslighting and manipulation that I'd missed in my own situation, helping other women trust their instincts. One young mother, Angela, struggled with in-laws undermining her parenting. After sessions, she limited their access. "I kept thinking I was being too sensitive," she told me, "but watching how they treated my concerns made me realize that people who truly cared about my children would respect my judgment." The parallels to my own experience were striking. Linda became an unexpected source of ongoing support. She'd revealed she'd considered speaking up about Vanessa for years, but lacked courage until Lucas. "Watching you stand up for your baby gave me permission to finally tell the truth," she told me. "Sometimes it takes one person being brave enough to break the silence." Linda also provided updates that Mom and Dad had begun counseling, trying to understand how they'd enabled harmful behavior. "Your mother is starting to understand that protecting Vanessa from consequences didn't actually help anyone," Linda reported. "It's taken her this long to realize that love sometimes means allowing people to face the results of their choices." This insight about consequences versus enablement was crucial for my own healing. For years, I'd confused accommodation with love. Learning to distinguish between support and enabling changed how I approached all my relationships. Lucas's first birthday party was a celebration of authentic family bonds. We invited our Fort Henderson chosen family, Linda, and a few supportive cousins. Small, genuine, filled with people who truly cared about Lucas, not their own image. David's toast brought tears to my eyes, to Lucas, who taught us the difference between family that demands your silence and family that earns your trust. May he always know the difference between love that protects and love that enables. The contrast with previous family celebrations was stark. No performing, no managing emotions, no walking on eggshells. Lucas played freely. As I watched him, I felt deep gratitude for our choice to prioritize substance over appearance. He was growing up surrounded by adults who modeled healthy boundaries, authentic communication, and unwavering commitment to child protection. The most surprising gift came from an unexpected source: Eleanor's sister, Margaret. At 93, living in an assisted living facility, she'd heard about our situation. When we visited, she shared stories about Eleanor. Eleanor always said that family isn't about blood connections or social obligations, Margaret told us, while Lucas played with toys from her own children's childhood. She said family is about people who show up for each other when it matters, who tell the truth even when it's difficult, and who protect those who can't protect themselves. Margaret also revealed Eleanor had been concerned about Vanessa's behavior with children for years before her death, but had been dismissed. "Eleanor would be proud of what you did," Margaret said. She always believed that protecting children was more important than maintaining comfortable lives. You honored her values, even when your own parents wouldn't. The validation from Eleanor's sister felt like a blessing from beyond. Now, watching Lucas navigate our backyard with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted his safety, I understood we'd given him something invaluable. The security of knowing the adults in his life would always prioritize his well-being over social convenience. David joined me on the patio as Lucas discovered a butterfly. Our son's delighted laughter filled the air, stumbling but always getting back up. "Any regrets?" David asked quietly, though I knew his answer. "None," I replied. "Look at him. He's fearless because he knows he's protected. He's curious because he's never been punished for being a normal child. He's confident because he's never been told that his needs don't matter." David nodded. "He'll grow up knowing that love means protection, not accommodation. That family means safety, not obligation. That his worth isn't negotiable, even with people who share his DNA." The lessons learned through crisis had become the foundation for the family culture we were building. Lucas would understand that healthy relationships required mutual respect, that boundaries were expressions of self-care, and that sometimes love meant saying no to people who demanded harmful compliance. As the sun set, and Lucas finally tired himself out, I felt complete peace. We'd traded the familiar dysfunction of my birth family for the uncertain work of building authentic relationships. The trade had been more than worth it. Lucas would never remember the Christmas dinner that changed everything. But he would grow up with the benefits of our decision to prioritize his safety over family harm. He would know his parents could be trusted to protect him, that his needs mattered, and that love never required accepting harm. The war that had begun with a slapped baby had ended with the victory that mattered most: a child who was safe, loved, and free to develop his own authentic self without performing for other people's emotional needs. In losing my birth family, I gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that I could build the kind of family that actually deserved the name. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between your comfort and doing what was right? What would you have done in my place? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.